In this video I would like to express some thoughts about the Thulean perspective and the three triangles that you see in some pagan communities. Their true meaning is the interconnectedness of the eternal logical idea that we found in Hegel's logic, nature, the world of time, space, and matter, and spirit, the world of thinking man and consciousness. And the three are in a reciprocal process of mutually determining one another. And this process is the life of the Absolute. And if you want to understand my point of view at the moment, I would say that my transcendental self is the one transcendental self which lives through every thinking creature, and this is what we might call God. And my empirical self that you see here, the body that I find myself in, is doing its best to express the thoughts of the higher self, but I am limited and I have flaws and wicked tendencies as a human, but I am trying my best to reflect the highest thoughts of the transcendental self. And I, like many people of broadly my generation, I used to follow, it was around 2017, the channel The Thulean Perspective, which has been censored since. And it was there that I learned many spiritual teachings. And there was this idea that paganism was not the joke of a religion that it is often presented to be, or the traditional image that people have, that it's a stupid religion. The idea of the Thulean perspective was to show the inherent rationality in paganism, and as I am a Hegelian, my purpose is to show to others, which are a reflection of myself, and to understand myself, the inherent reason in the world everywhere. And one of the most fundamental ideas that I discovered in this spiritual process, watching the Thulean perspective, was that this motto came often, that Odinn, the god of Nordic mythology, it says, "He is you, he is your mind." And I became conscious that Odinn was the coming into being, the process of consciousness of the European mind, and that it was by following the Thulean perspective that I had my first religious experience as a church community. It's kind of ironic, but it's dialectical. Dialectical humor is kind of weird, but the invisible church that the Christian talk about, for me it was the conscious Europeans gathered on the internet, on the Thulean perspective, and the comments that they left under this channel was like the European spirit becoming conscious of himself. And it was said that paganism was a system of tests, and the purpose was to show to the initiated the shadows dancing on the wall in front of them. And many years later, with more experience, I have learned to understand that the shadows projected in front of us are logical categories from Hegel's logic, because the world is the reflection of God's mind, and that's why the world is rational. And the the main idea developed by this pagan revival was that of reincarnation and memory. And I had always this intuitive feeling that reincarnation was not your empirical self, that you should remember that you were a baker in the Middle Ages in some Italian town or Scandinavian town. That's not that. It is not you as an empirical self who remembers another empirical experience. It is your transcendental self which incarnates in your body as an empirical individual, and you become conscious of the unity with this transcendental principle, which was called Odinn in this pagan revival. And there was this idea that you had to give birth to oneself and forge a new identity, a new spiritual identity, and this is the entire process of Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. And there was also the Socratic Maiotics, which is the Socratic name for dialectics, and the entire process of mind and spirit is dialectical. It is self-negation, alienation, returning to oneself out of this first negation. So the truth of this pagan revival is Hegelianism, and the thing that was most important is that this pagan revival, which was a collective religious experience. There were not many Europeans, but those who were involved in it had a higher state of consciousness. And the great lesson of this was that the Thulean perspective tried to show that the pagan mythology and the fairy tales and the natural world, they were interconnected, and there were reciprocal correspondences and connections between both, and that if I speak as a European, our religion was rational, and this idea that you could interpret nature through mythology and fairy tales and songs is what gave birth into my mind, which was actually not my mind, but a transcendental self, of cultural Hegelianism. I just wanted to invert this pagan revival by showing that it was in the modern art forms, not only the old songs, fairy tales, folk songs, and traditional ways, but in modern pop culture, that's what I identified as our spirits, when I identified as a European, was being manifest and made manifest in modern pop culture, and that it was through Hegel's philosophy that spirit could become, could conceptualize itself and become conscious of itself. And there's also an aspect about the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the sacred lake. It was said that the sun is the source of all light, and the moon reflects the light of the sun, and that's why you can be inspired by the symbolism of the moon, because it reflects, it's a reflection of the light of the sun. But in the Scandinavian traditions, it is said that those who contemplate the reflection of the moonlight in the sacred lake sometimes become have a mystical intuition, because it is the reflection of a reflection, and this is symbolically speculation, speculative philosophy. It is the sun is immediacy. If you have a light which goes out of itself without encountering any opposition, it cannot know anything about itself. It needs an opposite, an other, a mirror, and the moon is the mirror of the sun, in order to be reflected. But then it just comes back into itself. It needs a third movement, and this is the entire movement of dialectics, in order to, from the first movement, the immediate, the mediation, which is the reflection of the moon, a coming back into itself by incorporating the mediation. And this three-way process is the entire process of spirit. And yeah, so the Thulean perspective is not just my personal experience, it is the phenomenology of spirit, which is not only European, but spirit at large. But the reason why paganism has been revived is because paganism has been negated, because in order to produce spirit you need negation, and the cultural history of Europeans has been and is being negated, and this process of negation dialectically creates its own negation. That's the negation of the negative, and that's affirmative and assertion, and this is how spirit is brought to life. And now, from my point of view, paganism is just a figure of consciousness in the development of spirit. And I will make more videos about it, but that was just to give my broad perspective.